You're listening to Extraordinary Conversations with askChenai. But have you actually asked Chenai yet? If you're living with ADHD, you know the real problem isn't laziness. You're smart, you're capable, but ADHD makes work harder than it should be. For brilliant minds with ADHD, the biggest barrier isn't ideas, it's follow-through. At askChenai, we get it. We support high-performing professionals with ADHD who are tired of struggling with time, admin, and attention overload. We match you with trained virtual assistants, not just people to manage your calendar, but people who can gently chase, remind, prioritize, and break things into steps you can actually action. You don't need another app. You need a human who gets you. Our packages start at just £159 per month. We're not your ordinary virtual assistants. We're extraordinary virtual assistants for extraordinary minds. Visit www.askChenai.com or email sales@askChenai.com to find out more. Let's help you build a system that sticks. Welcome back to Extraordinary Conversations with askChenai. We are sitting down with incredible people, often of Zimbabwean descent. We talk about life, struggle, reinvention, identity, all that stuff that shapes who we really are. Today's guest is Nadia Riepenhausen, a communication strategist, a viral LinkedIn storyteller, and someone whose posts regularly stop people in their scroll. But that is not her only story. Her story starts in Zimbabwe, where she grew up, and she's lived in South Africa, the US, Switzerland. She's built a great career and has a voice that cuts through the noise. So a little bit of a backstory. I actually met Nadia many years ago when I was living in Switzerland. And that's a place that is not exactly overflowing with Black women. And I've been there for about a year, and I found this meetup online. It was a group for Black women and other women of color. And the first time we met, we got there and she was like, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Zimbabwe." She said, "I'm from Zimbabwe." And that's really cool. We weren't besties, but we saw each other and we've always hyped each other up. And I love that, how we can find each other across borders, across bandwidth, and just say, "I see what you're doing, keep going." And that's why I wanted Nadia today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's great to reconnect with you in this way.
So Nadia, our very first question is not a serious one. We throw our guests in at not the deep end, but the fun end. And one of our signature questions is, let's imagine you're stepping onto a massive stage. There are thousands of people in the crowd. But before you walk out, your hype song has to play. It's a theme song that captures your essence, your vibe, your journey. What song are you choosing and why?
The song for me definitely is Rise Up by Andra Day. It's a song for me that just captures resilience. It's kind of a soundtrack about rising after a fall, rebuilding after loss, and finding power. It just is a powerful song that kind of captures a lot of things for me. So yeah, that would definitely be the hype song for me.
I don't know that song, Nadia, and maybe it's because I'm like really, really uncool. So what kind of, is it electronic music? Is it, what is it?
It's I don't even know how to describe it. It's like an R&B kind of almost gospel-y song. So it's very powerful. And Andra Day, I think she was in Hamilton. She sings very like bluesy, very soulful. And the song, I have to send it to you afterwards.
So are you walking out more slowly then? So you're not like coming out shaking, jumping up and down on the stage.
Not everybody comes out violently.
Not everybody comes out violently. You're coming out slowly, gracefully, rising up. Okay. I love that.
It maybe would have been like more Eye of the Tiger, Beyonce before, but I think this is now more like I've arrived, like a little bit of maturity, a little bit of peace. Yeah.
I love that. Every time I ask a guest what their theme song is, I start to regret the choices I've made. Okay.
Right. So you are a LinkedIn pro, right? Like I have loved everything you've posted. I've read up on you and I've seen your bio and all of that. But I want to know, like, if I were to stop you in the middle of the street, who is Nadia? Like the stuff that's not on your LinkedIn bio.
Yeah, that's not an easy one, but I would say a continuous work in progress. African at my core, mixed race by identity, and now also Swiss by virtue of where I live, where I'm local, where I've experienced the bulk of my experiences. Have lived in many places, had to rebuild multiple times, and lived through several seasons of loss and reinvention. Yeah, I think that's the best way that I would describe myself.
There are a lot of things there that you've touched on that I want to drill down deeper, but I don't want to jump the gun. So we have to tackle them one by one. So you've mentioned that you are mixed race by identity, which for those of our listeners who are not from Zimbabwe, this is actually like not as common. We do have different ethnicities, but being mixed race, you would have grown up being an ethnic minority in Zimbabwe. And so let's rewind. Can you take us back? And you don't have to only look on that lens, but I'm interested in your origin story. What was Nadia like as a little girl growing up in Zimbabwe? What kind of an upbringing did you have there?
I would say before life got complicated, so before adulting, I was full of energy, emotional, expressive, a little bit rebellious. I did grow up in a very complex, dysfunctional home. And spent much of my childhood in boarding school. So from 8 onwards, I was always in boarding school.
Which boarding school did you go to?
I mean, junior school and that, I went to Alex Park. And then I went to Bishopsley. So that's where I first started at boarding school at 8. And when I think back, or when I tell people, like, I think I was 7 turning 8, to be suddenly thrust into boarding school is a lot for such a little person. But it really shaped, I think it shaped who I was in that you had to be independent. You know, it wasn't that you had someone taking care of you specifically all day. So you kind of, I guess, yeah, became resilient, kind of free-spirited, and had to find my own way. So yeah, I went to boarding school from 8 all the way through to high school. I went to Arundel. You know, people from Zimbabwe will know the kind of, you know, perception that people have. So that was, you know, obviously going to these very colonial schools that were considered very good schools. I grew up in a very German-influenced household, so not very typically African, not very typically Zimbabwean. My stepfather was German.
Okay, that's interesting. So your mom married a person who moved from Germany to Zimbabwe.
So he was already based in Zimbabwe when my mom met him. So my mom was a fairly young mother, and she met him, got divorced from my father when I was very young, and then met my German stepfather. So I basically grew up in a very German household, but in Zimbabwe. Yeah. So eating German food, watching German TV, going on holiday to Germany like 2-3 times a year. So hence the very German surname. Nice. So I think that formed the mixed race identity and kind of fluid identity that I couldn't really place. So even though my mother, my father, my grandparents, not out of choice, but simply were classed as colored, that label never fit me because it wasn't my experience. But obviously then you didn't really have a choice. And especially, you know, growing up in Zimbabwe wasn't that I could choose what identity. And I think mixed race wasn't even a thing then. You know, you were just colored. And there wasn't really much discussion on it. But it was an identity that I found very difficult because in typically colored spaces or areas, or it just wasn't my identity, and I just found it really difficult to fit into those spaces. And I think that always contributed to feeling a bit other, just because at home I had this very German influence and environment, and then also the schools that I went to, colored people were the minority.
Yes. I don't think I remember. I think I could count on one hand in each of those schools the total number of people who are identifying as colored. And some of them were actually mixed race, and so didn't identify with the colored community because they were the product of a black person and a white person who had a child. And as you know, the community of colored people is actually a community with a specific culture and history. And so then they often felt different as well.
because I had two parents of different races, my stepfather essentially was my parent. I had the same experience as someone who was biracial because I had two parents of different races and I grew up in that environment. So even though technically I wasn't the product of sort of a biracial situation, that's how I felt because that's how I grew up in the household that I grew up in. And there was always this uncomfortableness at being called colored because I was like, well, it actually means nothing to me. Like, and in those spaces, I don't fit in. Just by virtue of how I spoke in Zim, as you know, how you speak, people already make huge assumptions. They already know your background just based on how you speak. So my grandmother, for instance, she lived in Bulawayo and lived in a very colored area. And when I would go on school holidays there, I would have to change the way I spoke, code switch, to speak more colored. Because if I spoke the way that I did, I was going to get beaten up. So I would quickly switch the way that I spoke. And then I'd come home and my mother would be horrified because she was like, why are you speaking like this? I send you to private school and now you're speaking like this.
You know, code switching is an art, though. I must say, code switching is a very important skill. Barack Obama is the ultimate code switcher. And I think the ability to shift, because we all do it. Some of us do it better than others.
So, I just learned to do that. And my mother sent me to speech and drama lessons because she was like, you have to knock that out. And so I was always just kind of navigating the two worlds. And when I went to school, my friends were either black or white. There wasn't really a choice. And most of them tended to be white. But when it came down to politics or race, then immediately, obviously, I would side with my black friends. And I think some people found it hypocritical, but it was the only way that I knew how to navigate because it was like, well, I'm not white. So I'm sorry, but I can't take your side on this. So it was always sort of floating a little bit.
Nadia, what kind of German food were you eating in Zimbabwe? Oh, well, could you even find so I lived in Switzerland. I'm intimately familiar with German food. So how was your stepdad getting that German food to Zimbabwe? Was there a German community so they had their own German shop? Like the way we have Zimbabwean shops here in the UK where you can go buy boerewors and stuff.
Not quite. So he used to travel to Germany a lot. So he would bring a lot of it. We also used to have like a pantry full of German food. But also my mom just used to cook. She would make schnitzels. She would make very typical hardcore German food, very heavy. Everything was like potatoes and meat and bread and salami and cheese, and that's the food that I grew up eating. So living in Switzerland, the food's not that different, and I can't really eat that food anymore. But I am still like a schnitzel diehard. So schnitzel is life.
I love sausages, so I love all kinds of German sausages.
So that was literally the food that I grew up eating, and I think it's when people ask me, because obviously here, if I say I'm from Zimbabwe, they ask me a lot of Zimbabwean cultural references, and I don't have them. Obviously, growing up in Zim, yes, of course, I had certain cultural experiences or roots, but my childhood was just really German. It was like living in this little European enclave in the middle of Zimbabwe. Like, we had a sauna and stuff like that, which when I tell people here, they're like, how could you have a sauna in Zimbabwe?
Oh, that's so funny. Wow. And I think you must have told me this before, but I'd forgotten it about you.
Thanks. I'm very intrigued by the story because then, I came here, said, I was going to ask you, what's your Zimbabwean flavor or, the one thing that you think is, the most Zimbabwean thing about you?
I left Zimbabwe in 1996. It's a very long time. And probably even by, maybe you'll tell me now that you weren't even born then or something. I always have these moments.
I'm a 90s baby. I was born.
She was born and she was in nappies, I'm sure.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
So I left in 1996, literally straight after high school, and haven't lived in Zimbabwe ever since. So I would say, I think there's certain aspects of being Zimbabwean that you'll always carry. And I think for me, it's being able to adapt to different environments. Like every single country that I've been able to find a way. And I think it's something uniquely Zimbabwean in that you're just you're resilient, you're adaptable, you grew up with certain morals and values and a way of seeing the world and engaging that I think stood out for me in the places that I went to. Like the first place that I went to when I left Zim was New York. And in Zim, I was never really that good in school. I was always sort of told, well, forget university, you'll never make it. And just not, especially going to Arundel, I wasn't academic. So in their mind, I wasn't that intelligent. And then when I went to the US, suddenly I was on the dean's list, which went from being in like the lower streams and just considered not very smart, just by virtue of the experience that I had in Zimbabwe.
Where were you studying in the US? Where did you go to New York? What were you studying?
So I was at Hofstra University, which is in Long Island, and I was studying broadcast journalism. At that time, that was my dream. I just found it like, suddenly I was studying the things that I was really interested in, and that made a huge difference. Arundel was very academic. If you weren't good at science or maths, then it was kind of considered you would never make it. And suddenly I was in this environment doing courses, studying things that were super interesting to me. And I found coming from Zimbabwe, you were just miles ahead of other people and miles ahead of the American students, just because of your experiences, your learning, and just, I think, a lot more emotionally intelligent and aware and able to fit into different spaces and environments. So I think that to me is the Zimbabwean thing that sticks out to me the most, that I've carried with me. I wouldn't say it's so much a Zim cultural identity. Obviously, when I meet Zimbabweans, there's still an excitement and there's a need to connect, and understand and place them. But because it's been so long and I don't really travel to Zimbabwe, I can't say that I have a very strong rooted Zimbabwean cultural identity. But I think it's more just in terms of the values and experiences that shaped me.
I like that. And so, like, I understand what you're saying from like a very personal level, because I've also had to travel quite a lot and I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. And I wanted to ask you if you have at this point found like that place where you say, I think this is where I actually fit in.
So, it's been multiple places. So when I left Zimbabwe and I moved to New York, I thought that's the place for me. Like, this is where I'm going to find myself. This is where I'm going to build my life. That was the dream. And then it was taken away from me. So I had to leave because of financial reasons. And not because my parents ran out of money, but because I had a very difficult relationship with my stepfather and he basically just stopped paying. And cut me off financially. And that was brutal because it was just like, I was doing well in school. I felt like I was doing all the right things. And then this dream was taken away from me. And it took me many, many, many years to recover from that.
So what happened? You were just in the US. What were you in your first year, your second year? What year were you in?
I was still in my first year. So I had to start in the US at a community college. Because I didn't have the best ACT scores. So I started and I did a year at a community college and then I moved to Hofstra. And it was brutal, so that was taken away from me. And then I moved to the UK.
So, and not to drill down, but that is freaking awful. So you were there, you were studying, you were in the US, and then you just got an email or a phone call one day saying, sorry, Nadia, come back to Zim. We're not paying for you anymore. What did he want you to do? Did he want you to just come back and study in Zim? Like, what was the plan?
It was literally that, a phone call. My mother was like, he's not going to pay anymore. You have to leave. You have to come home. And in that moment, it was a defiance. I mean, obviously, I was devastated and shocked. And I was like, what did I do? What have I done? And it wasn't even about me. It was more about a sort of power and control, which I only realized at a later stage.
It's a common story. And I must say, I've seen this happen so many times. Because obviously when you're coming from Zimbabwe, it's quite unusual to have someone who has enough money to pay those foreign fees. So either people are going on a full scholarship, but even if you go on a scholarship to the US, for example, there's that little component of aid that you have to pay by yourself. So in my case, my brother helped me, and then later I got a job that I could pay that little component, that little gap. And it was only like $1,000 or $2,000 compared to like the $40-something thousand of fees. But I saw a lot of people, like a really good friend of mine, her sponsor, not from Zimbabwe, but from another African country, just woke up one day and said, I don't want to pay anymore. And you just have to go back home the day afterwards if you don't find some way to get the money. And it's pretty awful. And I saw it up close. It was very traumatic. And we luckily found a scholarship, a very niche scholarship that was able to fund the money at the last moment. But That is awful. Wow.
No, so basically, yeah, that obviously completely changed my whole world. And I'd obviously grown up very privileged up until that time. And then I wasn't only like removed from the university, it was like cut off from that day, no more money. And basically it was like, okay, you should just come home. And I refused. I said, I would rather be an illegal immigrant in America than come home. I just won't. Like, to have had this taken away from me and now come home with my tail between my legs and have failed. I mean, I realized only later that it wasn't my failing at all, but I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So I basically just floated around and people took care of me. I tried to find scholarships, tried to find funding, and I couldn't. A family took me, and it was actually a woman that I worked with, one of the officers because as I did like a student job, and it was a Jewish family, and they took me in for 3 months. But obviously it was like, well, I can't just be your like adopted African child, as nice as it would be. So I eventually found out about this visa at that time that you could get to move to the UK, like a working holiday visa. So I did that and basically left the US with like $200. That's all the money that I had, and moved to London and just, first like slept on people's floors, started doing like temp jobs, and it was brutal. I mean, London with no money is not, it's harsh, you know.
Who did you stay with when you got to London? Did you have friends from school or some family members?
I had like friends from Zimbabwe who just like took me in, and I would sort of kind of rotate and stay with different people, and then found sort of temp jobs. Obviously I hadn't finished my degree. I was 19, so it was pretty brutal. But I think in retrospect, those experiences shaped me, because it went from being highly privileged to suddenly it's survival. You know, I really had to learn how to survive. And also I just couldn't recover from the fact that the US was the place that I was supposed to be in, New York. And London just paled in comparison. I was like, this is like a second world country, or I don't know. I just don't like it.
Don't speak ill. You're in the presence of a proud British person. I'm Zimbabwean British. Do you know what, Nadia? Have you ever read this book, Americana, by Chimamanda?
Yes. It's one of my favorites.
Do you know who you remind me of? You're reminding me of, I mean, your situation is not as bad as him, but you know the character, right? The childhood friend. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read the book and you plan on reading it, too bad. There's a guy who's obsessed. His whole dream is living in the US, and it doesn't happen. And he comes to London, and he has such a horrible experience. And if I had never lived here, I would have thought this was the worst place in the world. If I just read that book, I would have sworn never to come.
No, I was like, this is budget. Like, this is not what I was sold into. And so it was awful. But I somehow found a way to survive. So none of these places were, I mean, New York, I guess I felt like that was, so it's just going back to the question that you had, like, where is home? What feels like home for me? All of these places were kind of survival and functioning, and you know, basically after that, then I moved to South Africa only because I needed to finish my studies, because it was like, well, without a degree, I'm just not going to get anywhere. And South Africa was the only place that I could afford. But obviously it was not for me.
How could you afford it, Nadia? How could you afford South Africa? Because even me, growing up in Zim, I couldn't even afford to go to a South African uni.
So I had then some money from being in the UK, and also then my stepfather had sort of felt some guilt about what had been done, so he contributed some for me to continue. But it was always an uphill battle. It was kind of up and down, but he did support, you know, occasionally. So I was able to go back. But for me, it was also, again, like, this is not my chosen place. The dynamics in South Africa were not for me. The racial dynamics, especially moving somewhere like Cape Town, and then there you, looking like me, you are most definitely colored. And if you try to argue otherwise, you're always going to be in conflict. And I was like, this is just not my stuff. This is not my battle to take on. I've not grown up in this environment. So South Africa I found really difficult. Like, I just found the sort of, like, obviously apartheid legacy, and just that people are so heavily in their boxes and their, you know, categories. I just really struggled there. But I spent 12 years there because I didn't have a choice, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. I had a Zimbabwean passport at that time, and it was just, you know, it wasn't like I could just say, okay, let me just now move back to the US, or maybe move back to the UK. The choices were not there. So I ended up staying 12 years in South Africa, and they were hard years. You know, I financially was always struggling. I felt like I was just never going to make it. Like I was just always going to be struggling. And then met my now ex-husband, who's British, in Cape Town, and it was kind of a whirlwind romance. Got married after 6 months, and then moved to Switzerland. And at that stage, it was very like, I have nothing to lose. Like literally, when I met him, I mean, I was depressed. I was struggling from depression, and he kind of came and rescued me from this life. And it was literally like, yeah, I'll sell all the few things that I own and move to Switzerland. Like I literally, because I remember having to tell my mother, and by the way, I met this British guy and now we're getting married. And she was like, who does that? You know.
But you were like, well, I've got nothing to lose. It's not like there's much here for me. I might as well.
I was 33 then, and I was like, yeah, I'm not asking your permission. I'm just telling you this was what will be happening, you know. And yeah, I just did it, and I don't regret that decision. We were married for 11 years, so it's not that it was a decision I regret. Switzerland, as you know, I mean, it was certainly the first couple of years were brutal, were just so hard. I'd spent a lot of time of my childhood in Germany, and I guess I expected it to be the same, and it's definitely not.
It is not.
Language-wise, you know, I speak German, but I don't speak Swiss German. Even now, I've become Swiss.
Same with me.
You know, I'm a Swiss citizen now, but I understand Swiss German, but because I grew up speaking High German, you know, it's a completely different country and place. And I found it, I was living in the Swiss countryside. It was basically Amish. So I moved from like Cape Town, sort of beach and cosmopolitan, to like an Amish village, you know. And I was like, I don't know if love is strong enough for this. Like, this is brutal.
You know, Nadia, I went through a deep depression when I moved to Switzerland as well. Like, when you met me, I was at my lowest point. And there's a lot of other stuff that was going on in my life at the time, but it was literally my lowest point in my life. One can be forged by fire. Maybe I've had two low points. I have low, but it was low and sustained. Some of the things that I struggled with about Switzerland were a constant feeling of otherness. And I've lived in many countries, and it's not like I wanted to pretend that I was Swiss or pass myself off as a Swiss person, but it was almost like they're so unused to people like me. I felt othered all the time, and it didn't always come from a place of malice, but it was, you know, my friend came to visit me once in Switzerland, and we were walking around, you know, we were walking in Zurich. She turned around and she just yelled at a group of people, "What are you staring at?" And then I said, "You can't do that." She said, "Is it like this all the time?" And I said, "Yeah, this is my life." And then she said, "No," because she said, "What are you staring at?" She told them off. And I thought I could never do that. I would just, like, you know, live with it. And also, like, the weird, you know, I read an article that you wrote in, I think, an Adecco, where you're talking about the strange questions people would ask you, like, how does a Zimbabwean woman end up working in Switzerland at a bank or something? I would get questions like that all the time. And then, because I was getting my PhD at the time at this, whatever, their most prestigious university, they just couldn't wrap their heads around it. It's like they were trying to do mental gymnastics to figure out. They were like, "But you're Zimbabwean. But you're not really Zimbabwean." I'm like, no, I'm from Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe. No. But are you? And I just, it just didn't, it's a weird place. But this is a podcast about you, not about me. But I'm just saying that I can relate. Girl, Switzerland, there are things I love about it. I began my career there. It's clean. My husband's biggest regret is that I won't let us go back and live there.
Look, I thank you for sharing that, because it captures it really well. You know, in the beginning, I literally also shouted at someone on the train, like, "What are you looking at?" You know, and my ex-husband was like, "Don't be ghetto. Like, this is Switzerland." Because I couldn't understand it. And in the beginning, I was miserable too. I mean, I think I used to cry every day my first year here, because I was just like, I can't do it. Like, I will literally disintegrate and wither away. Like, my soul is being sucked away. And I think it took time. And then I got a job at Credit Suisse, which for me was like, wow. I did feel like, wow, I'm a Zimbabwean working at a Swiss bank. And, when I was asked that question, I use sarcasm. That's like my shield, my defense. So when the person said it, I said, I ran and I swam. And now I'm here, because I was like, if you ask me
I ran from the bottom. I ran all the way up. I swam and I'm here now. Boom.
So this very, very Swiss bank with old Swiss white men, and I made my little niche because I brought that humor. I was slightly on mute. It took me a little while to bring my full self, but then I actually found like a groove, like they really appreciated it. They found it refreshing because I was unfiltered, and I actually somehow just, found my groove, and actually in the beginning loved working there. And was very quickly promoted, and there I was like vice president in a Swiss bank, and I drank all the Kool-Aid. I thought I was very, very important.
You were, Nadia. You were. Look at me. I'm like, you were. I'm bringing that Zimbabwean auntie energy. You were, Nadia. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Yes. Don't let them tell you otherwise.
It was huge for me. There I was going to the World Economic Forum and interviewing Roger Federer, and it was for a time amazing. Like I thought, wow, I've made it. This is it. I'm living in Switzerland. I work in a Swiss bank. And I think that's something about Zimbabwean identity too. I was just so grateful. Just accept the, because to try, like telling my grandmother and my mother, my mental health is not good. It's like, no, you must suffer.
Nadia, you don't speak Shona, do you? But there's a Shona word, shinga. Shingirira. And I hate that word because I feel like it's always used by like, old grandmothers and aunties to tell you to like stick it out in a bad marriage or something like that. Not that I have personal experience of it. Aaron, I love you, baby. But you know what I mean? Like, it's the word. It's like when someone's going through something nobody should put up with, they're like, I was shingirira. You are describing that essence of then we become able to like just put up with all kinds of nonsense because, you're
just so grateful to be there. So I kept quiet. I kept going. It was like, no, you will carry me out dead out of this bank. Like, I'm not leaving because I've earned my spot here. And, obviously it took its toll, and eventually did end up leaving, not by choice. I was made redundant, but it was honestly the biggest gift to me because otherwise I just would have never left. And I think, the point that I'm trying to get to is it took me a long time and a lot of experiences to get to the point where actually Switzerland is my home. I've become Swiss. I'm actually very proud to call myself Swiss because it was not an easy feat. I had to jump through some significant hoops to do that. I had to live here 10 years. I was told after 10 years, you can't get a permit that's higher than your husband who brought you here. Like, we don't have that. We're a non-EU citizen. Third national, that's what you called it. You're not an EU citizen, gets a higher permit than the person who brought them here because you're a dependent. And I was like, well, I earn more than that person. I have, it wasn't just about that, but I was like, I'm integrated. I speak German. Yeah. I'm self-sufficient. And I really had to push and present them their own laws and say, I am actually allowed. And then they finally allowed me to apply for permanent residency. And then, when I was divorced and then I moved to Zurich, I had to wait some time. And then I applied to be Swiss. And that took 2 years. And I got that this year. And basically, so moving away from the countryside, because that was just going to kill me. And I gave it a good 11 years. And I was like, this is not for me.
Where were you living in the countryside?
And Zug, when you say that to people, they're like, oh, Zug is so international and this tax haven.
It does seem very international, like sports cars, people who are there because they, basically, for my listeners, Zug is an area outside Zurich where it's full of British people from other countries who live there. Am I lying, Nadia? A lot of them live there because of the tax reasons.
Mostly all live there because of the tax purposes. And when I first moved there, I was like, where is this? Because I'm not seeing it. It was basically like everyone burrowed into a little hole after 5 p.m. And the money was evident. And obviously there were all these big global companies there, but there was no life, like nothing. No life. And we lived not in the cool part of Zug, if there is such a thing. It was basically, we were like in the Amish part, like the really country. And I gave it the best that I could, but I think COVID was a changing point for me where it was just like, okay, you can change your life. And I got divorced. I moved to Zurich. I now live in the center of Zurich. I don't know if you still remember, but I live in Seefeld, which is a beautiful area.
Yeah, I remember Zurich. I lived there for like 7.5 years. It was a big part of my life.
So I live in Seefeld, which is right by the lake. It's a fancy area. It's very bougie.
I know. I love Zeefeld. You know you have arrived when you're living there instead of in Kreisdrei, like me. I love the streets. I was for the streets.
I am not. So I live in this, I mean, it's almost impossible to find an apartment in Zurich, but the universe was looking out for me, and I live in this beautiful old building in the roof apartment. We have a beautiful rooftop. I live on an amazing street, and I feel like I manifested this, and I created my Switzerland.
Man, you touched on something that I carry lifelong trauma. Finding an apartment in Zurich, especially, and don't gaslight me, especially as a Black woman. And when I was a student, in my budget with people, I was literally telling the story last week to the kids in my family, and they fell over in stitches. When I lived in Switzerland once, I went to look at an apartment. I was so desperate. They would have had me at hello. I walked in. There was an older Black woman inside, and her apartment was, no word of a lie, guys, covered in dolls. You know those little dolls? Those little porcelain creepy dolls that look like they're from a horror movie? All over her sofa, everywhere. All over her sofas, everywhere. In her shelves, everywhere. There were hundreds of little dolls, little white dolls everywhere, all over her flat. And she gave me the tour. Guys, to know me is to know I'm quite messy. I mean, it doesn't show because I have, a very good support system, but I'm quite messy. And then she was going on about how everything would have to be very, very clean. And she said, my house is so clean. She said the weirdest thing. She said, my house is so clean that if I drink water from my kitchen, I don't have to rinse the cup first. And I thought, who needs to rinse the cup first? Just take a glass. And then she said, so do you want the place? And I was like, yes. And I just imagined myself living in that creepy house. But of course, she rejected me. But that was the kind of situation I was in, where I would have been willing to live in this place with the creepy dolls and somebody who is like really obsessed with strange things.
So I think for me, I get bored of having discussions about racism in Switzerland. And I know that sounds a bit obnoxious, but I'm just like, I don't want to be in WhatsApp groups where we talk all day about the aggressions that we've experienced. Get on with it. Get on with your life. Like, we've chosen to be here. You will always be the minority here. Yes, of course, it's great to be around like-minded women, like-minded people, but I can't sit and talk about racism all day. Of course, it's happening.
Sometimes a really good survival mechanism. Many years ago, I quit all my Tumblr accounts and all of that because I decided that actually I wanted to live a soft life. I said, I just want to put my head in the sand. It's not that those things aren't happening around me. It's just, I kind of just want to have, it's like how I said, I don't watch movies about Black people suffering. I'm in a season where I only watch movies about Black joy. So I don't want to watch Tyler Perry's movies about suffering. I saw there was one on Netflix. I want to watch movies about Black women having middle class problems. She's going through a divorce and she needs to go to Italy and she meets a lover. I just want to watch stories about Black joy or Black middle class problems. And it's not exactly what you're saying, but it kind of is that sometimes this stuff is happening, but I don't need it to be all up in my face all the time.
And I don't need to be rooted in suffering. I like nice things. And I go to nice places, and I've cultivated that for myself. And sure, of course, there's microaggressions happening. I just kind of told myself I have this energy field, like this little bubble around me, and I'm just not entertaining it. And that was a huge game changer for me. Because it was like, well, the people are not going to change. I've chosen to be here, and I will make it work for me, and I have. Okay, changing where I live was huge, because now I do live in a more diverse space, and just by the virtue of where I live, they might like, well, you must be able to afford to be here because you're here. So that's good enough. And I know the flower guy, and I know the people at the coffee shop. When I walk past now downstairs, people say hi, and I stop for a conversation with the lady with her dog, and that's what I craved. And I think, it's just a change in energy. I can't be rooted in suffering. It's controversial, but I've been parts of the different diaspora groups, etc. And in the beginning, they brought comfort. But now I prefer being a lone agent. Like, I don't like a group mentality all the time. And when you disagree or you don't have the same mindset, it's seen as problematic. And I don't support every single activity that the African community or whatever is doing.
Because we have diversity even in our own communities.
Sometimes some of these experiences are very monolithic. You know, it almost, I might get in trouble for saying this, but it's got Wakanda energy. And I'm just like, this is not my Africanness. Because it will be like, show up in your African dress. I'm like, I never wear that.
We don't have one actually as Zimbabweans. I mean, guys, I'm wearing this, but yeah, we don't actually have one.
We have one now, Chenai. They've come up with like a different material and whatnot. Like they've tried.
Some person invented one that they claim is, they just copied what Buya Nehanda was wearing in one poster. But you know, Nadia, I have a story. So I made friends with this when I lived in Switzerland. Another woman, she was black, she was cool. We went out one night. And you know, when I was younger, sometimes I thought, if only I could just like find other black friends. We went out one night. Two funny things happened. One, I showed up to the club on my bike and she almost died. She was like, what did you show up on your bike? I said, of course I rode my bike. I rode my bike everywhere around Zurich. And she said, no, this isn't the kind of club you show up on your bike, go around the corner and leave your bike around the corner. But my white friends used to ride their bikes everywhere. And also my black friends in Philly. So I was like, okay, learning, fine. But the crazy thing, later on that night, we were in the club and then there were these two guys, they were black and they were gay and they were dancing together and they were obviously in love. And I think they started, they maybe kissed. It wasn't inappropriate. It was literally just a sweet moment of two people in love. She and her friend lost it. They were like saying all these things. And then I sort of stopped them and I said, guys, but you know who you're hanging out with, right? And then they were like, oh. And they were like grossed out. And then I was like, oh dear. And I left feeling more alone than ever. But it's a stark reminder that we have diversity in our own communities. Like, there's so much diversity. There's like millions of people in Zimbabwe alone. Why would you assume that just because you're now in this country, everybody thinks the same, they have the same cultural background? So I think that's also what you're experiencing. Because sometimes when people are homesick, they cling on to groups like that because they assume everyone is going to be the same, think the same. And there can be a source of common shared experience where you can support each other on some things, but there are limitations to it.
That's it. Obviously I've found comfort and support in some of those groups and I don't want to knock it at all, but I think it's been liberating for me to find my own voice and I don't have to water it down. Oh, why do you call yourself mixed race? Like, why don't you call yourself black? Or just questions. And I'm like, I don't have to curate myself for you. And no, I don't want to show up in African dress because that's not how I dress ever. And it feels like I'm playing a caricature or it's performative. And I'm like very African. I am very much in touch with that. I just don't need it to look like how you want it to look. So that's been a journey as well where I've kind of found comfort in solitude. Like I just like my peace. And I like to choose who and what I give energy to. And that's been a huge learning. So if you ask me where I'm from, where do I fit in? It is Switzerland in that I created it myself. So the community that I have here, it is mostly Africans, but not only. I have some Swiss friends. I have friends from the UK. It's really mixed. And I now have a partner who is very Swiss. So it's a really great mix of people that I've attracted and it just feels like my home. I've stopped traveling as much as I used to because I just really like where I live. Like when I land in Zurich and it's this zen, sterile experience, I'm now just so used to that. And I found comfort in it. But yeah, I agree. It can come across sterile. It's almost not real. It's like living in a little bubble, like a golden cage, because you get too used to it and then you find it difficult to function in spaces that are not like that. I think any place can become your place if you create your own tribe and you bring your own energy. So Switzerland didn't give that to me. I had to bring it. And I think I made Switzerland work for me rather than I work for Switzerland.
So I absolutely loved your post. I think your birthday post is the one that I absolutely loved the most. The first point where you said you don't have to reinvent yourself, just remember who you were before you were told to shrink. I mean, I've never had somebody come out loud and say that to me face to face. And I've seen this with like all your posts talking about, no job is worth your sanity. Walk away when it's time to walk away. Where do you get that power from? Like what gave you that confidence to say, at which point did you say, you know what, I'm just going to say what's on my mind. I'm done. I'm not going to wait for anybody to give me permission. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking.
So I think it came from years of holding it in, of editing myself, being polite. There's that, again, that Zimbabweanness of, you must know how to behave and how to be. And all these experiences that I had here where I was in these environments where by default you are always going to be other. And losing my job, and it's not the first time that I lost a job, so it's actually the third time that that's happened to me in Switzerland. And just... the first couple of months spending day in, day out, applying for jobs all day in the dead of winter and literally finding it difficult to do basic things like get up and shower and face the day, and getting rejected multiple times from jobs where I knew that I was a good fit for the role, but it just was such a brutal job market. And basically I saw this one guy's post where he was talking, he was like, I've been looking for a job for a year, also based in Switzerland. And he wrote this beautiful post where he made himself a Star Wars character. And he was basically like 1 year on, still fighting, and he used all these Star Wars references. And the post just got such a huge response. And I remember reading it and I thought, how refreshing. Like he just, he's a sort of high-powered marketing exec, but he's just said, I have no job, no one will hire me, I'm too old, all of these things. And it just inspired me to write my own. So the first post that I did, I'd written posts that were quite honest previously. Like I shared, I think there was a post on the day of the girl, and I wrote this post about my fighting to get an education, and that post had a huge response. And then it was always this like, oh, it's LinkedIn, like don't be too much, don't be too extra. And also the environments that I worked in, it was like you had to be really careful what you were saying on social media. So basically I saw this guy's post and I was like, oh, I'm inspired, I want to do something. So I created my own post and I did this little AI action figure because it was popular at the beginning of this year. Everyone had these AI action figures. And I basically just wrote like, I lost my job and I haven't been able to tell anyone that. And I did it in my sort of funny, sarcastic way. But also, I remember pressing post and I just thought, oof, like in Switzerland, people don't say that they're unemployed. There's people who still have Credit Suisse on their LinkedIn profile, even though the bank doesn't even exist, because there's this shame to being unemployed. So when I wrote this post, and then suddenly just the response, and people wrote to me, and high-powered people at the bank wrote to me and said, oh, thank you so much for writing that. We lost our jobs and we know that feeling. And it's brutal. And I think just something sort of shifted in me. I've suddenly felt free by saying that I was unemployed, that I couldn't find a job. It really just set me free in a way that it was just like, now I've owned it. I've put it out there. And suddenly the floodgates opened. People were writing to me and saying, oh, well, what about this opportunity? Or I could put you in touch with this person. And people just wanted to help. And that was the beginning of me telling my story. Because after that, I was like, because people seemed invested and they were like, okay, well, keep us posted. What's happening next? And then I guess I had to think, like, how do I keep the story? Because I can't every week say, well, I'm unemployed and sort of tell my sad story. So how do I turn this chapter into something that's meaningful? And that kind of started me writing on the post. And then it was sort of like, okay, let's take a journey of like, because basically, after that post, then people approached me and I found, like, for instance, a consulting job. And that just sort of, the momentum came, but it was like, I want to tell this in my way. And I want to be authentic about it. And I think every time I posted something, there was always this moment of like, is it too cheesy? Is it too much? And also I used these pictures of myself in a way that I normally wouldn't, because it was like, I did this photo shoot, and I just was putting myself out there in a very open, very celebrating myself way.
Yeah, people can be so afraid of putting themselves out there. So a couple of things I always try to say is, the worst thing that can happen is if you put yourself out there, not even the worst thing that can happen, if it tanks, no one will even see your post because the algorithm will hide it. So no one will even know that you posted a post that flopped. But if it goes well, then lots of people see it. But you miss out on so much by not putting yourself out there, especially if you're in a season where connection is important, networking is important. And those are seasons like you're looking for a job, you're looking for your next opportunity. If you're running a small business and you're looking for clients. And there is something I could totally relate to, Nadia, at the beginning when you said in the beginning, you were like, is this cringe? I've been posting on LinkedIn for a few years now. And when I first decided to start, a couple of people told me, don't do it. In my job where I worked, somebody had to take me aside and say, we're concerned about some of your LinkedIn posts. And I said, well, which one? And then it turns out it was just one that I made during Black Lives Matter about my experience as a child and going to a pretty white school as a black kid. And they were like, actually, and all your other posts are fine. It was just that one we were scared about, like, you know. But there's something about putting yourself out there. There's something about just doing it, and most people appreciate it. And on LinkedIn, most people don't like your posts. They lurk. There are a lot of lurkers. Most people will look, appreciate it, but they're afraid to hit like, especially if it's spicy, salty, juicy post. But they're there, they're watching, and then you just see them, you know, come in through the DMs or say they want something. But you just have to keep showing up.
Yeah, and it was really like, telling the truth was, I knew how to do, and also using my humor, using my way, and always being a bit sarcastic and kind of taking the narrative. And you're right, there were people who, because they would write to me and I'm like, oh, I didn't know you didn't like it, or you didn't, you know, and they were like, no, but it really resonated. And I would just get so many messages from people. And then I'd say the most difficult post was the one where I spoke about bullying, because I had experienced it twice here in Switzerland. And that was, you know, where I had to think, okay, how am I going to put this out there? Because, you know, I'm looking for a job. I need to be careful of how I frame it. And I think every post, I wanted it to be about what I learned, about being honest about who I am, how I used to be. Like I wrote about, there was one post about where I said, you know, be unhinged but evolved. And I wanted to really reflect a journey of learning. And I think that's, if anything, that I take away from this experience. The posts were not for other people, they were for me. And it was like putting myself out there, talking about difficult things, being vulnerable, confronting all of those things. So for me, it was healing, if anything. I mean, getting the attention, obviously it's nice. It's wonderful to be validated. I mean, I have people still liking that birthday post and wrote such amazing things to me. But really, it was just more healing to me. I mean, obviously, it's nice to be hyped. And of course, I've had my moment of sort of, look at my likes. And, you know, I go and look. And I whenever I'm feeling or doubting myself, I go and read that. I'm like, that you did it. Like, you resonated with so many people. And it's just powerful to feel that. And I think one of your questions that you were going to ask is what was the most surprising comment? So I'll comment on that. Yeah. And basically someone wrote to me, I think it was a comment on the birthday post, that it just said, your vulnerability and authenticity are your superpowers. Mm-hmm. You make others feel seen by being so unapologetically yourself. And that was beautiful because it captured for me exactly what I think I was trying to do and where I found my niche. You know.
The topic of bullying is something that is very close to my heart. I think a lot of Black women are experiencing really messed up work environments. A lot of them are experiencing bullying and inappropriate behavior in the workplace because there's like layers upon layers upon layers of things that we're expected to do. So I, for example, have cultivated the most gregarious personality ever in the world ever. If you work with me, I am most jolly. I go to the pub, I tell jokes, ha ha ha. And it's a counter to ever being accused of being like, you know, the angry Black woman. Because I know when you walk in, this is what people are expecting. But then there are so many other expectations that you constantly need to manage and balance. And the biggest one that I struggle with is a lot of people wanting to put you in your place. So the root of a lot of bullying that I see, because I mentor a lot of Black women, I'm friends with a lot of Black women who are navigating global careers. There's an undercurrent of not knowing your place. That they're like, you don't know your place. And then I'm like, girl, You don't know my place.
I create the place. I am the place.
Let me reintroduce myself. I'm, Vimbai, or I'm Nadia. Let me introduce myself. But a person can only take so much. Surprisingly, a lot of bullying will come from not only are the cases I see usually other women, occasionally they're other women of color, bro. And so it's not always just because somebody looks like they should be on your team. It doesn't mean they're rooting for you. Sometimes they also have the same biases, or they have that like crabs in a bucket thing where they feel like only one of us can succeed, so I have to push her down so that I can get ahead. And it sucks, but it's a constant theme around being bullied in the workplace. And Nadia, I know obviously you don't identify as black. You're mixed race. You probably, in some environments, to some people you look black.
Thank you. So this has been so loaded, and I am learning, I am absorbing. I feel like I'm sitting next to a big sister and I'm just like learning so much about life. I am significantly much younger than you guys, so this is big sister vibes for me.
Significantly, get out, girl.
Chenai, allow me. Allow. I know it's less than 10 years. It's not that significant, but yeah. So if we have your 19-year-old self, your 18-year-old self, because that's just before you've left, and your 80-year-old self, and they're having dinner, what are we talking about?
I would say that my 16-year-old self would be in awe of the 80-year-old self. I think there would be a fierceness, hopefully a fabulousness, still at 80. Hopefully I still look preserved. And I think it would be talking about like me saying to that 16-year-old, 18-year-old, you were always enough. Like you were always good enough. And I wish that I could have told you that, but the journey that you took was necessary to get where we are now. Like had you not had that, you wouldn't be who you are. And I think one of the things that I said in that birthday post, and I did a whole separate post about it, was basically all that I've lost has led me to better. And it really has. Like all of the situations that I had that felt like such a huge loss shaped me and took me to, when I think about the next thing that I attracted, the next job, when I lost a job, friendships, relationships, it always was better. It really always was, because you'd learned and you were evolved. And I think that's what I would tell that 18-year-old self. It was like, you were always enough. You were always amazing. You were always special. You just had to play small to survive. And I wish that somebody had told you that, and no one did. No one ever told me that, and I had to find it by myself, but in a very hard, long, painful way. Like now almost 50, really only finally is there kind of a peace and not caring so much what people think, and just being very happy with myself. But it took a lifetime, and I think that's the thing that I would want to talk about. The messy parts, all of it. Like look where you've come, look who you've evolved, and it doesn't look like what you think it's going to look like. I didn't think I'm going to be divorced at 48. I didn't think, that I'm going to be sitting unemployed several times, having to rebuild again and again and again. And that's part of the journey. That's part of what's made you who you are. There's a question of yours. Sorry, I'm like almost prompting your questions. But basically like life phases, like this phase of life versus my 30s. 30s were about proving, about please like me, validation. I used to be that person on Instagram that would be posting, look at my life, look how amazing it is, look where I go. I deleted Instagram, and that's huge because that was my whole identity. And on LinkedIn I am sharing, but it's serving a bigger purpose. And that was a huge evolution for me. Because I was always FOMO. I had to be where everyone's at and be part of something, and be included. And the shift that's happened from getting divorced, finding my own space, the last 8-9 months of being unemployed was really learning to be with myself and learning how to sit with yourself, comfort yourself, be very happy and content, because I wasn't going to an office every day. I didn't have colleagues to bounce off of. So there's some days when you have to be your own hype person. You have to live with yourself. Where now I'm like, I'm just very content. Like, it's like I like being with myself and just a few people who get it and who understand. And that's kind of enough.
Yeah. I mean, if you ever have like that conversation and you put it down, I would love to read it because I feel like I would be learning a lot from that. And so, like, what are we eating? You said you like German cuisine. What else?
Like, I have this thing about schnitzel. So I had said, when I become Swiss, there's this famous restaurant, maybe you remember it, Chenai, called Kronenhalle. And it's an institution. So people like James Joyce sat there. It has real Picasso paintings. And it's where all the who's who in Zurich would have gone. It's the place, and it serves traditional food, and it's like white tablecloths and silver service and gloves. And they have the schnitzel that the price of it is eye-watering. Like that, at the price that it costs, it should change your life, pay your rent, solve all the world problems. So I think I would want to eat a schnitzel just purely because that's been my lifelong comfort food. That my mom, she used to have to make that for me separately, and everyone else would eat what they're eating. So yeah, it would be a very expensive schnitzel in the best restaurant in Switzerland. And actually, I did say when I become Swiss, I'm going to go and have dinner there. But I had no job, so I felt a bit like I couldn't really justify the price. But I will be, I can't share too much, but starting something soon. So I think that schnitzel will be in order pretty soon.
Schnitzel will be in order. Go and enjoy the schnitzel. Spend the money. Didn't we say we're all about soft life, soft living?
We deserve the soft life, guys. We do.
Yeah. Here we celebrate the softest of living. Nadia, I cannot let you go before asking you my signature question. So I am obsessed with zombie movies. I love them. And I think one way to really get to know somebody is to ask what they would be doing if the zombies were taking over. So let's imagine the zombie apocalypse has arrived. You have 3 options. Number 1 is you say, look, the zombies are going to win anyway, and I don't feel like being anything but a zombie. So I'll let them turn me into a zombie immediately. So you become a zombie. Option number 2 is you say, oh my goodness, this world, it looks like a terrible wasteland. I don't want to be a zombie because they get treated so badly, but who can live without being able to order pizza? No running water. I think I'm just going to take myself out and be done on day 1. I don't even want to live. And the third option is to say, I am fighting the zombies, and I am going to try to live and survive and create a little community here in the zombie wasteland. But the key being that, Nadia, you're still you. You don't get to imagine yourself suddenly having muscles and being able to fight and having, ninja skills. You're just yourself. If you haven't been to the gym in 6 months, that's the body you get to take to the zombie apocalypse today. So what are you picking, Nadia? What's your zombie apocalypse strategy?
I don't know if I can remember all of them.
It's just 3. 1 is zombie, turn into a zombie. B is die. C is fight.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think the old me would have picked option A, like just give in.
And become a zombie.
Yeah, fold to fit, fade into the background. I think the space that I'm in now would pick C. So survive the apocalypse, go out loud.
And how are you fighting? How are you fighting the zombies? So you're in Zurich. I guess they'll be swimming across the lake, running through the streets. What is your weapon of choice? What's your strategy?
I think it's use your words,
Using words. Have you watched a zombie movie, Nadia?
I'm not a fighter, so I would say machete, scarf, Rambo, but No, I'm too rich auntie for that energy. So hopefully in this fantasy scenario that would help me to survive.
Nadia, you're gonna die so fast. You haven't watched the zombie movies. There's no words. There's no talking. They're just zombies. They don't even speak. They don't even speak. You have to pick a weapon. You have to say if it's a hammer or a pan or a spade or just burying a big hole. There are a lot of bunkers in Switzerland. That's one thing that you have to your advantage.
True. My apartment block actually has one.
There you go. You can go into the bunker in your apartment block.
Yeah. So I think it would be a mix of B and C, I guess.
Yeah. Well, B is just killing yourself right away. Which, for the record, Vimbai and I have both picked that one.
We're out.
Like, I don't want to be around like 90 or 100. So maybe, yeah, swift and fast. And you made impact. You did all the things you want to do. So maybe, yeah. Maybe it is.
And it's authentic. It's on your own terms.
And in Switzerland, you can pay to die. And I think you have to have good reasons.
Nadia, thank you so much for being exactly who you are.
This really was so cool. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Like, wow. Blown away. Thank you.
You are definitely still unhinged in the best possible way. We love it. Thank you so much for joining. It means so much to me. I'm so glad we met in Switzerland those years ago. And who would have thunk that you would be on my podcast today? So guests, that is the end of our podcast. If you have been moved by today's conversations, send this episode to a woman who needs to hear she's not too much. She's just not in the right room. To read more of Nadia's inspiring work, you should follow her on LinkedIn. And we are going to put the link in the description below, so check it out. And we'll be back next time with another extraordinary guest, another extraordinary conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. If you enjoyed this episode, forward it to a friend. Until then, stay bold, stay real, and stay a little unhingy. Bye, guys. You're listening to Extraordinary Conversations with askChenai. But have you actually asked Chenai yet? Here's a thought. This could be your podcast. You've got something to say, a story to tell, a brand to grow. But between editing, scheduling, writing the intro, and promoting it, who has the time? That's exactly where we come in. At askChenai, we match busy people with smart, reliable virtual assistants, all based in Harare, Zimbabwe, including assistants trained to help launch and run podcasts. We can help you plan your episodes, schedule guests, write show notes, edit audio, and even create your social media posts. Think you can't afford to hire help? Think again. Our packages start at just £159 per month. So if you've been putting off your podcast, blog, newsletter, or brand building, stop. Go to askChenai.com or email sales@askChenai.com. Let's make your voice heard.